Thank you all so much for being here. Welcome to my lecture recital on Unheard Voices, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion of Sacred Music in the United States. Today, we'll be looking at a variety of composers that fall all under this group. And before we get too much into it, we're going to begin with a piece by a woman named Hildegard von Bingen. So I hope you enjoy. What you just heard was a piece written by Hildegard von Bingen in the 10th century. We'll get a little bit into that, but first I want to define what we'll be talking about today. This idea of sacred music and diversity, equity, and inclusion. For this project, I have a very deep interest when it comes to seeing where sacred music trends are and where they will be going. And so I explored a variety of different journals and writings in order to understand what is being talked about, what is being played, where people kind of are with this whole thing. So music has been an integral practice of religion for centuries. We have so much history regarding it. However, there are a lot of voices that have been unheard throughout these years, underrepresented groups within sacred music and beyond. These groups, of which I focus on, are women, persons of color, LGBTQIA+, as well as persons from non-Western cultures, and how this music both influences sacred music and in ways that we can use it to help support our types of congregations and the people participating within this. Historically, women have faced significant barriers when it comes to sacred music. Many religious institutions limited their participation, having not allowed them in choirs, having not allowed them to sing, and this starts to change throughout the centuries, but we find that the idea of this unheard voice still presents itself. The same goes when it comes to persons of color. Systematic racism doesn't stop when it comes to the church, unfortunately. And so a lot of these pieces help to bring light to this area. Along with this, we have issues regarding LGBTQIA+ persons and how in sacred music, many times these people have been receptive of both homophobia and transphobia and how that has influenced the music that has been created. And finally, we have non-Western cultures and so in sacred music, a lot of the music has been in predominantly Western classical music. And so we have kind of an idea that sometimes that this is all sacred music is. But the goal of all of these areas and pointing them out and talking about them isn't to say that we've been doing it wrong. It's to say that we can do it better. And we can do it to be more inclusive. We can do it to be representative of the people of which this music is reflecting. And so within this idea, I surveyed these 5 music journals regarding sacred music. The American Organist, which predominantly does write about organ music, but also other areas as well. The Choral Journal, which reflects a lot of choral music. Early Music Journal, which is very much representative of medieval, Renaissance, and some Baroque. The Sacred Music Journal, which is just as it says, and the Yale Journal of Music and Religion. And within these journals, I looked kind of beyond the denominations because I want to understand where sacred music is in the United States and how it's being reflected amidst multiple people, not just one type of congregation or one type of group. In this, I found the following. So it's just the 5 years I looked at, starting here in 2019. We have article focus and authorship. So article focus means that what the article was about is something to do with one of these groups. The authorship means that the person who wrote it belongs to one of these groups. You will see that authorship usually far exceeds article focus. And in 2019, we have the start with the Choral Journal, kind of, taking the lead here, you can really see, followed by the AGO and the following. In 2020, and I don't find this to be so much a coincidence, especially with the fact that we had the Black Lives Matter movement going on, and there was a lot of attention drawn to DEI starting at this point. We see an increase throughout the journals, and especially when it comes to authorship, but also more article focus. So as I was surveying through these articles, which I have to say was so enjoyable, because I got to see so many people starting to be written about their music, about their lives, trying to understand where they came to be, understand how their music situates itself within history and beyond. And by the time we get to 2023, actually the American Organist takes the lead with this, and the authorship goes crazy high. And I find from all of these to see this trend of really wanting to incorporate more of this material within the sacred music world And also because it's difficult to ascertain between all of the congregations to understand what everybody's doing. So this just gives us a little bit of context to see what's being written about, what's being put out there. And so we get to Hildegard von Bingen, who for many is considered the first woman in the church to produce music. We have so many writings about her, and we have her correspondences with others. She was a magnificent person in that at this time, women did not typically write music, and if they did write music, it certainly wasn't written down, but hers was. Not only that, she's also in the Catholic Church considered a doctor of the church, and the first woman doctor of the church within that. And she spent her life in well, if we think of it now, it's kind of like a convent, but she really was part of a abbess system, which meant that for a lot of the nuns that she worked with, they would build these rooms off of the sides of the sanctuary, if you will. And what those rooms were it's where they would stay only. There would be one slot through the room where they would be able to see out to the congregation, and they'd be able to receive food. And a lot of the nuns that she worked with, that's where they lived until they died. She did not do that, but a lot of them influenced her. And so when she ended up taking over, she wrote a lot of music based on women's voices and also using chant at the time. And from what we heard, which was an arrangement based on her original chant, she also didn't do what was typical of Gregorian chant at the time. She used much more what we call melismas, which really didn't come till later, but these ideas of not just every note has to be a word, but these swooping lines. And you heard in the first piece how it was set for women's voices, being the range it was and how it flows through it. And so we'll come back to her a little bit later for some more information, but I want to tell you about some other voices of which you'll hear today. The next is a woman by the name of Jeanne de Massieu. She exemplifies the challenges that women face in establishing themselves as prominent figures within sacred music. She was a gifted organist, studied under the renowned Marcel Dupré, and achieved great success very early in her career. She became the first female organist to secure a record deal, opening doors for women in the field. However, her relationship with Marcel Dupré diminished, and from this, it ended up that he accused her in a way of not being loyal to him, if you will. It's hard because she herself never really got an answer from him. But from that point, he spent his time devaluing her career. And she had a very hard time going and playing recitals after that, even though her works are brilliant. She read a whole series of exercises that could be pieces in themselves and would blow you away if you hear some of the recordings of her playing them on the pedals. I mean, talk about a brilliant organist. We also have another woman who's actually local to here, Emmylou Deemer. She stands as a shining example of a woman who's defied societal expectations and made significant contributions in sacred music. She was born in 1927, still living here, and she exhibits both talent as both a pianist and a composer and an organist, and just so many areas of which she touched. As a female composer particularly, she had a significant international presence, which I think is very relevant to how I often say I have yet to find a place that doesn't have at least one piece by her. Everybody seems to play at least one piece by her, whether it be choral, organ, piano. And so now we're going to hear some of these different pieces. Throughout this recital, I'll be talking to you a little bit about them. We'll hear them, and we will also be singing 2 hymns, which you should have got the sheet when you came in, so feel free to join along when it comes to that. But here's our next piece, which is Variations on Ophélie. Another person who I would like to highlight is a woman by the name of Ethel Smythe. Diverse perspectives and identities and experiences should be celebrated and embraced in all aspects of society, including in sacred music. However, the LGBTQIA+ community has received, and often lately, a lot of limited opportunities when it comes to participation due to persistence of both homophobia and transphobia. I think it's very crucial to explore this and try to understand, one, where sacred music is now, and understand how these voices played a role throughout. Hence, how we come to Ethel Smythe. She, along with Hildegard von Bingen, actually both belong in different ways to this community. Ethel was openly queer throughout her entire life. Very, I would say, in some ways unusual for the time period. But that is how she spent her life, living as who she was. Not only that, but she was also a suffragist. Specifically, she was very crucial in getting women the right to vote. She also wrote different protest songs to be able to be sung at these different events. And the fact that she wrote them down means that we also now have them. She also corresponded with a lot of different people. And this is where her and Hildegard are very similar in that aspect, where their correspondences, upon first glance, maybe seem as if they're just talking to a friend or somebody else. And that's what we hear a lot, I think, in history, is, oh, they just had a friend. But when you look at these writings, it's so much more than that. And not only that, but who she wrote to during her times were other women, some of who were married but still were themselves queer, and trying to understand her role in the world as well as within the church. She wrote a lot of different organ music, piano music, a variety of different things. Hildegard also, in her music, she wrote a lot to what we consider, again, one of her friends. And for her, this friend was another nun who actually went off from the convent and was sent somewhere else. And why this is significant is that Hildegard then writes all the way up to the Pope. And we have this writing of her, writing to the Pope, begging that her friend not be moved to this other place, along with a bunch of other things that she, of course, had to include in the letter, because it's not like now where you can just shoot off an email and hope to get a response. But not only did she send this letter off, but the Pope did respond. Unfortunately, they still moved her friend, and her friend ended up dying. She never saw her again. And after this is when Hildegard's visions started. And her visions are when she started writing music, is when she started writing them down, is when she started writing a lot. And so with both of these women, I think that it really highlights this idea that no matter what, you will still continue to live as your true self, no matter the circumstances. And not only that, but you will continue doing the things that you're meant to do. And for both of these women, it meant writing sacred music in times when it was not really the case for them. And so this next piece is an organ prelude on a traditional Irish air that Ethel Smythe actually wrote for one of the women she corresponded with. Up next, we will be singing a hymn. I encourage you to feel free to stand up and sing along with it. It's all right if it's something that you've never done before, but I'd encourage you to pay attention to the text throughout it, and yeah, just have some fun with it. I know I will. For that hymn, the reason I chose it is for many, especially of persons of color, it is considered the Black national anthem. And I find it so interesting that it's a hymn that they chose for that piece. And so it was written by two brothers, as you can see up here, James W. Johnson and J. Rosamond Johnson. And they wrote it at a time when, this was even before the civil rights movement really took its full hold. So we're talking at a time where Black churches were really becoming established. They were spreading their good news. And this piece really took on a life of its own. And the thing that caught me with it is the fact that it is a hymn that they chose to write it as. They could have wrote it as a lot of different things at that time. But that and another piece that we'll hear later, I think it's also important to understand how many different areas of sacred music that can reflect what is going on in the world. Things from hymns to, as you've heard, the choral pieces to organ pieces, and things that I haven't included on this recital, piano works, orchestral works, solos. There's a variety of things that are out there. All it takes is a little bit of exploring and trying to understand perhaps why these were written and how can we bring them to life. And so, along with these two brothers, we have a couple other composers here who I've included that fall under this idea of how systematic racism affects the church and how yet composers still find their place in it. One of these people is Andrew Balfour, who is a living composer from Canada of Cree descent. He's an Indigenous composer. He was born in the era of the 60s scoop, and if you do not know what that is, it was when they came in and took children, usually babies, away from their families and gave them up for adoption to white families. And he was taken from his family, and he was given to a minister and his wife, and he had a very hard, difficult childhood. He actually got arrested and put in prison. And in prison is where he met other Indigenous men and joined a choral group. And from that moment on, he decided to only write choral music. He decided that was what he was going to spend his life doing and reflect this experience that he had. Another person is Florence Price. Florence Price is one of America's first notable African-American female composers. She fought and had numerous barriers throughout her entire life. But she had an undeniable talent, and that nothing was going to stop her from making that happen. She allowed for both the use of organ, of choral music, of orchestral pieces, and she really, I would say lately, has also received a lot of attention because of these pieces, and quite frankly, how well they are written, and how much they reflect not only her style, but also she had so much interactivity with other composers. And they actually formed a group. It was her and Nora Holt and Estella Bonds and Mata Robert George. And it also goes to show how much it matters that other people are involved in your work and how much support can mean and what that allows opportunities for. We also will hear a piece by a man named Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who, for me, took the style at the time and just exemplifies it in his writing. Especially in this choral music that you hear by him, he uses a thing we call text painting, which is when the text helps drive what the music is kind of going on. And it also helps to, that's why they call it text painting. It helps to paint the text. It helps to paint this picture for you as you hear these words, as you hear this music. It helps to encourage the lifting of this story. And so we will hear now 3 pieces by these composers. See, I got so caught up in the music, I forgot to change the slides. But you know what's going on. We have a couple more people before I wrap up this presentation. The next is a person named Fela Shawandi. This is a Nigerian composer, and it should be noted that most composers, specifically of organ music, are really located generally within Europe and the United States. You will see composers throughout other countries as well composing, but why Fela is specifically, I think, really interesting is that he combined two ideas. As a person of color, and specifically of a person from Nigeria, he really had this idea to, one, emphasize Pan-African American music, this idea because so many from Africa were taken to so many different places away from their homes and sent into slavery. There is a real longing for wanting to connect with each other. And so in his music, he uses, as we will hear, African American spirituals combined with elements of Western classical music. He was an expert really in both and spent his life doing these. Followed by this, we will have a hymn by Chayun Park, who we consider, with some history and understanding in Korea, the father of hymnody. And this is one of his hymns that he wrote that we could see the Korean text here. It's been translated into English, and it's found in the Glory to God hymnal. But I think sometimes, especially when we see these translations, we oftentimes maybe skip over or don't really give these hymns the justice that they maybe deserve. And so in both of these pieces, we have composers who exemplify really this understanding of taking their cultures and allowing us an opportunity to experience it in a way, to understand it, to try to hear and feel what they were feeling when they wrote these things. And so here are the next two pieces. So what is the future of this? I think that's a question I ask myself a lot, especially with all that has happened in especially the last 5 years particularly, about where is sacred music, where it's going, and where DEI stands amidst it. And for me, from researching all these different composers and also researching about just understanding like where congregations are and where they want to go, I think DEI is in some ways the answer, because it provides just so much plentiful resources. I think a lot of times we want to think about things as either or, either I do this or that, but I don't think that that's what sacred music is really about. I think it's about the and. It's about we can do this and that. We can play something by this composer and that composer. We can do something that is familiar to us and something that is new. And that's where I really see from my research between the journals and programming this music and generally just talking to people, that there is this real energy of wanting to connect, of wanting to understand. And I think that using sacred music in this way can help us so much. Before I finish with my last piece, which I want to tell you a little bit about on a personal note, I just want to say first, thank you to everybody here for coming and supporting me throughout my whole doctorate journey. I would not be standing here if it was not for all of you, and I don't take that very lightly. I take that in my heart because I just appreciate all of you so very, very much. I want to say a special thanks to the wonderful choir who just hopped right in and some music that we have probably some of us have never done before, but they did it the whole time with a smile and with some jokes, which I really appreciate because it makes it so much more fun to be with you all. I also want to say thank you to Tim, Dr. Howard sitting back there, who has just been such a great support throughout this whole process. I was telling the choir today that I feel so unbelievably lucky to have landed at this church. It's not every day that you move across the country and everybody invites you in and just welcomes you like you were here the whole time. And so thank you, and thank you to Dr. Howard for being such a support. And I also want to say a special thank you also to Dr. Sparks and Dr. Emily Tsai and Dr. G, but especially Dr. Sparks, who's sat with me through many lessons and helping me read over this paper and this project and just helping me sort it all out. And finally, I just want to spend just a huge amount of thanks to my family who's here. My mom, my dad, my sister Jennifer, her boyfriend Brian, and my partner Nick. I didn't get here on my own, and I so recognize that. I have had so much help with it, and I just want to thank you all, and just from the bottom of my heart. This was such a joy to put together, and I'm just so thankful for the opportunity. And so I'm just going to tell you then about this last piece, and I have to say this is very personal to my heart. I just had learned about Roberta Bickgood this year. And I think that hopefully my story exemplifies why incorporating DEI into music is so important. As a female organist myself, it has been very hard throughout the years to see myself in the organ world. It's taken a lot of figuring out, understanding how I'm gonna play things, how I'm gonna do things, and I've never really quite known what my path would lead to. But in reading about Roberta Bickgood, I saw just so much of myself and so much more in her story. And so she was an organist, as you can see here, throughout her entire life. She actually at one point lived in Riverside, California. She had made her way out here. She was in Connecticut, New Jersey, New York. I think she spent some time up in Minnesota, over here in Riverside, and then ended up back in Connecticut. She was just a fantastic musician. She was the first female president of the American Guild of Organists, which is an organ association that I've been part of since I first started my organ journey. And she not only was the first female president, this is why it's kind of amazing. She this year that she got elected, they also had the first female vice president. They also had the first female secretary. Not only that, she was the first organist to get president that wasn't from New York. And on top of all of that, she was a write-in, which meant that she wasn't even on the ballot. That's how many people knew her around the country and wanted her to be president. On the year that she retired, it was just about done with everything. But she went on to be the AGO's president. And she just exemplifies so much of sacred music in the way that she incorporated a variety of musical styles in her writings. She would do choral, just different like choral festivals, concerts all around the country. She used to just get in her car and just drive there. And she faced a lot of different issues with her, between her being a woman and the fact that she played at so many different churches and didn't have like the secure church job, which at the time was very much needed. And yet she spent her whole life continuing on, never let it stop her. And by the end, when they actually did a fundraiser for her, they found out that she every year would write hundreds and hundreds of cards, Christmas cards, to anybody that she'd ever met. And at the fundraiser, they got so much money that to this day, there's still a grant in her name at that AGO chapter. And so this last piece was actually, we see here, I actually got to meet Roberta Bickgood's daughter, Grace Wiersma. She's a wonderful, wonderful person who so adores her mother. And in talking about this last piece, On an Ancient Alleluia, it was written by Roberta when a friend of hers went to a little shop in France and found this manuscript from the 16th century, which we can see here, thanks to Grace, that she decided to write this last piece on. And I wanted to include it here because I did not know what the original manuscript looked like until Grace sent it to me. And when I had asked Grace about it, she was overjoyed because of all of the things she had of her mother's, this was hanging right on the wall. And so I share it here with you. You'll hear this melody throughout it, but it just goes to show how even a little gift from your friends can go a long way, and how many connections can be made by just exploring just a little deeper. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy this last piece.